Sing the love and beauty, wonderful words of art. Let me more of the beauty sing, wonderful words of art. Words of life and beauty, teach me faith and healing. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of art. Beautiful
I first want to assure you, those of you that are here in the sanctuary, that you can see the bulletin and the sermon outline, I did not misplace my space. That does not in any way want to say a never-ending love. It wants to say an ever-ending love. Sometimes we wonder about that. Father is told of taking his 5-year-old son to Disneyland. It was all the little boy could talk about for weeks, and now they finally had, and it was there, and the boy loved the idea that he'd get to meet Goofy and Mickey and Minnie in the game. He was super hyped. They parked the car and could see the castles and rides in the distance. They made their way to ticket sales and then entered through the gates into a relatively small area where you were able to get your picture made with the characters. Truly a blast. The kid was enjoying it. But then it was time to go to the main park. But the little boy didn't want to go. He didn't understand. He thought that was the park where they just met the characters. And when his dad tried to hurry him into the park itself, the boy threw an absolute fit. The boy thought that they had just gotten to the most wonderful place in the world, and his dad was going to take him home already. He fought it, but his dad brought him around the corner. There was the park, with all the rides, all the other characters, all the people, all the excitement that is part of that. Think about that. How many of us are that way concerning God's world? How many of us get caught up in the amazement and the music and the beauty of the day and don't think down the road? One of my favorite gospel songs says, "This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels welcome me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore." Do you ever get uncomfortable in the world? Or do you get uncomfortable being different from the world? There's a difference. The song declares that This world is good, but heaven is still better. John had known Jesus for over 70 years. When John spoke of knowing him from the beginning, he did not mean that from the times of foundation, but he had known him long enough to become more acquainted. He had known him long enough to be aware of what was going on in the world. He had known him to understand there was a difference than today and eternity. So in the first book of John, 1 John chapter 2, John makes a couple of statements. Up to this point, if you'll remember, he's talked a whole lot about love. Love each other, love Jesus, love the people in the world, love our neighbors, love our church members, just love. And then last week he talked about growing, 2 weeks ago, he talked about the need for us to grow up spiritually. Some of us have not grown up spiritually. We're caught up in what we want to do. You know, it's like I talked 2 weeks ago when I mentioned the adolescents. How many of you know a teenager that's always right? Now, most of us held our hands up. Let me ask you this. How many know adults who are always right? What's the difference in them? Their age, years, but they're the same. And it's true in the church. In the church today, there are people who know it all. Some of them are teenagers. Some of them are preachers. Some of them are Sunday school teachers or piano players. I can pick on him, he's not here. Yeah, so we have to understand that there is a difference. But here John continues to speak on love, but he speaks of an ever-ending love. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 reads, "Do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." Now, when you see the word world, when you see that word in the Scripture, it means one of two things. It means either the physical creation, it means that what God spoke into existence, it means the whole content, or it means the attitude of the people. The attitude of the human race. Here, John is speaking of the attitude. Do not love the attitude of the world or the things of the world. If I had my screen on, it would say up there, it will not link, L-I-N-K. They do not connect. They do not make it happen. That's part of the reason why we haven't got the screen this morning. It didn't connect. It doesn't happen. So we have to go with what we have. And so today I want you to know that if you're a Christian and you believe in God and you trust Him and you hold Him up and you honor Him, you cannot be connected to the world. Just like the TV's sitting there, the screen is there, we think it's connected to this, but somewhere between there and the pad, tablet, iPad, tablet, whatever, the connection broke. And it should be the same in the world. We can see the TV. I can hold the tablet up so you can see the tablet. Here it is. The other video probably got to see that too. And so we can have it and see it, but it doesn't connect. That's what Jesus meant when He told us to be in the world, but not of the world. That's why He calls us out of the world. He doesn't call us to leave this physical presence of the creation. He calls us to leave the attitude of creation of mankind. John uses the word world to describe us and what's going on. Those of you who are part of the generation I grew up in would probably remember the pop song hit "Torn Between Two Lovers," sung by Mary McGregor. It spoke about a lady who was attracted to two men at the same time. How did she explain it? It doesn't mean I love you less, but there's just this empty place inside of me that only He can fill. Can you imagine standing before Jesus on Judgment Day and saying, "Jesus, I love you. I just needed the world. I needed what the world had to offer. I needed," and Jesus, John speaking for Jesus in His inspired word says, it will not connect that way. That's not how Jesus intended it to be. That doesn't mean that I love you less. That's just that you aren't all I need. You are not enough. And how would that make you feel if you were either one of those guys? John says, if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Remember where Jesus said you can't have two masters? You'd either love the one and hate the other. That's what John said. He's repeating what Jesus said. He's telling us that it will not connect. It will not link. But he doesn't stop there. He then goes into readings for it. In verse 16, 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. Let me repeat that. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. I remember reading a story about a 6-year-old boy in Wisconsin who tried playing one of those crane-operated games with toy prizes inside. You've probably seen this article. It's pretty prominent. I think it was in the 80s, but I remember to this point. I've tried it before, and I never get any prizes. Now, I know people who have spent hundreds of dollars trying to win a prize in these things. I learned a long time ago over a watch. It's not beneficial for me to get involved, and so I just don't do it. But anyway, the plush toys were inside, and he just had to have one, and he had spent all his money, and he just knew he had to have one. He felt the desire of the flesh. He seen what he wanted. He wanted it for himself. He saw it. And so he begins to climb into the machine, the apparatus. Some of you probably have heard that story. It's not a new story. It's been around a while. It's a true story. And this young man got himself trapped and had to have emergency personnel, fire department, come to get him out. I would have liked to have seen the video of that. Too bad it didn't happen in today's world. Someone would have put a video on Facebook so we could see it. Now, young people, do not try this at home. I'm not asking you to start a video. Please don't do that. I don't need mama's calling saying, you called me. So please. But seriously, he become entrapped. He couldn't get into the world, into the machine. He couldn't get out of the machine. Now that's what happens to a Christian. James says it, a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. James tells us you can't do both, but yet how often do we try? Now John uses 3 terms here. He talks about the lust of the flesh. I physically want something. It can do with various things. It could have to do with pornography. It could have to do with sex. It could have to do with materialism. I know if you think back a few years ago, there's a story out of Houston, Texas about a mother who killed some cheerleaders or had them killed so her daughter could become a cheerleader. There's another story all the time, it seems like anymore. We're getting stories of adults who go to high school to prey on teenagers, act like a student so they can prey on these young people. I've seen something I wanted, so it's mine. I have that desire, my body, my spirit wants it, I can have it. That's the lust of the flesh, lust of the eye. Who's got the best car in the whole place? Who drives the nicest vehicle out here? Don't everybody look at the same person. That looks bad. Do you wish you had it sometimes? Do you maybe compare your house to the neighbor's house? Do you maybe compare even your church to the church down the street? Do you live in a life of comparison? I was told once, and it helped me a whole lot in life, and I couldn't understand it. Comparison is the root of almost all dissatisfaction and unhappiness. I don't have something you have, and so I should be able to have it. I don't think that it's right that I don't get what I want. And we live in a world that's very much caught up in lust of the eye. Keeping up with the Joneses. Spending money we don't have to buy things we don't need so we can look as good as the neighbor. Fortunately for me, both houses on either side of me are empty right now, so I don't have to worry about looking as good as the neighbor. In fact, all I have to do is not mow those lawns, and then I look better than they do. I don't. I always mow theirs. In fact, my wife will attest. I spent almost 4 hours weed eating one the other day and didn't get my own weed eaten. But what I'm saying is, it's a game of the Joneses. Those two are an internal feeling. Those are about what I want and what I think, what I believe. But the pride of life. Putting it simple in one word, the pride of life is bragging. I got something better than you got. My grandkids are better than your grandkids. Yes, that's bragging, grandparents. I can say that because I don't have any grandkids. Got a grand dog. My house is better than your house. You know the biggest financial decision, biggest cause of divorce between couples in less than 5 to 7 years? That's almost always when they occur. Financial. And you know the biggest single one burden they had that is probably, they want a house like Mom and Daddy's got. Mom and Daddy's been having that life for 40 years to get there. I don't want that, I want. We begin to brag about what we've got, so we don't want people to look down on us. We think if we got more, make people think we have more, then they'll think more highly of us. Who gives a rip? Who gives a rip? But bragging is the pride of life. And for those reasons, if you read this verse 16, it says, is not of the Father, but is of the world. We will not love. The world will not love you in return. No matter what you do, there's always going to be somebody who has something better than you. I'll use an illustration from my father. He told me when I was just a young man, if I didn't learn to discipline myself, someone would always discipline me. I, like most young people, thought that was foolish. But you know what I found out? 18 and a half years in the penitentiary taught me that my daddy was 100% right. Not everyone ends up in the penitentiary, but people pay the price for being undisciplined. People pay the price, health-wise, when they don't discipline their health. People pay the price financially when they don't discipline themselves in spending. People pay the price spiritually when they don't discipline themselves. God says those things are not of Him. I want to encourage you to think about that. But He doesn't stop there. John goes on for one more saying, and this is the one that I really want us to think about this morning. Verse 17, and the world is passing away, and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. The world is passing away. It will not last. No matter how much you love the world, no matter how much you brag to the world, no matter how much you chase the world, it will not last. From the foundations of the world, whether you're speaking about the creation or you're speaking about the attitudes, there has never been an ideology, spiritually, Christian, that it would last. See, there's still the entire book of Revelation, much of Daniel, but it still says it will come to an end. And we need to understand that. The world as we know it will not last. The people in the world also live and then they die. I had a daughter and I love her dearly at Christmas time. We were talking and she said, Daddy, I'm so afraid I'm going to get the call and I'm not going to make it. I said, baby, I'll guarantee that's going to happen. There's it. 100% probability that we will die. Either in rapture or in life. But either way, there's a time coming when these bodies are going to be left behind. It's not enough to simply profess Jesus Christ. It's not enough to sit down at the table and impress people with your praying. It's not enough to attend church. I was sharing with Brother Ronald this morning, they say that more people will watch video, electronic, or listen to a radio message this week than they will actually show up in the house of God. And they feel good about themselves. It will not last. Has no future. Sinful attitudes and actions are primary characteristics of the world and its system, and are irresistibly appealing to the corruption of the unconverted soul. It also has a strong desire in calling upon the church. Church, I think it's important that we understand, you can stand in the pulpit, you can sit in the pew, you can sit on your couch, but that 1 or 2 hours a week doesn't make a rip if the rest of your life is absorbed. That 1 or 2 hours a week doesn't make a bit of difference if the rest of your life is absorbed in worldly activities and consumed. Not a thing wrong with getting a job. I think you ought to have a job, you ought to work, you ought to support yourself. But you can do it with the attitude that I'm doing it for Christ as much as for me. I'm going to share a very painful story with you. I love softball. 30 years, 25, 30 years, I officiated softball. I would feel comfortable in saying many years I had more income from softball than I did from my job. But whenever I got the understanding, I had someone stand in front of me and tell me, we don't go to church because we're trying to make sure our daughter gets a college scholarship. I've heard it the other way from parents of boys. I've heard it the other way from basketball, and I've heard it from a multitude of things. One thing about this morning, this girl had the talent. She had what it took to be a softball player until she slid into third base. I remember hearing the snap. I remember looking at the expression on her face. About 10 minutes later, I got around to making the call because I was worried about her. But in that moment, everything her parents had been going for in their lives, and everything that young lady had been going for in her life, everything that she wanted, everything that hoped and planned for, she had already been getting offers. She was only a junior. She had already been getting offers for college. But in that moment, it all ended. I've had people when I'm pastoring tell me, well, we can't come because we do soccer. We do basketball. We do baseball. I think all those things are terrific. But what happens when it snaps? The girl today walks with a limp. She's a very attractive young lady, but she walks with a pretty big limp. I see her occasionally when I'll go to a basketball game or something at school. She's a school teacher. But she traded her life. I asked her, you go to church anymore? She said, no, don't need it. Folks, it's not a joke whenever they say that a church is unimportant for a parent. It'll be non-existent for your kids, and that's the truth in most cases. I wonder today, who do you love? See, there's not only the song Torn Between Two Lovers, but there's one called Trying to Love Two Women. Ball and chain. Who do you love? You love the world, or do you love God? John says you can. There are different times he says, if you love the world, that you're not in love with God. Jesus said it. Paul said it. Oh, well, I'm a Christian, I'm exempt. Look up Demas. In fact, I almost named this sermon, Don't Be a Demas. Look up Demas. Someone said, well, tell me about it. No, if you want to know, you'll look it up. If you don't, you didn't want to know anyway. You just wanted to hear somebody. That sounds kind of cool for a preacher to say that, doesn't it, Brother Ron? But you know what? There'll be people sitting in this room watching that video that 10 minutes after it's over with won't remember it, except that part right there. I wonder today, who do you love? By the way, Sister Rosalie, thank you for telling me not to use Don't Be a Demas. Because I almost did. And then it would have been on the screen, and I wouldn't have to explain the spacing of the, but it was going to probably have to explain it. Please. Please. Who do you love this morning? What do your actions show? What do your attitudes show when you respond in just a moment? We'll all know. Let's pray. Father, we love you today. We honor you. We thank you for the chance to share your word. We even thank you for the difficulties that Satan tried to throw in. That's his job. Our job is to be faithful. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be faithful and helping us that we lean more on you than anything this morning. Lord, today, bless our time together. You've given us an opportunity to hear your word. Let the convicting Spirit of God speak to us. Help us to respond. In Jesus' name, amen. As we stand here in the sanctuary to sing a verse of invitation, I want to encourage you to be participating in that. Also, if you're at home, we're fine if you want to sit, but we want you to meditate for just a moment about what we're sharing. What's your next plan when you leave this room, when you leave that room?
Page 494.